So I'd like to introduce the man behind the Sunday with Survivor program at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County, and that is Michael Mantel. Michael is a 3G. Two of his grandparents are survivors, and they instilled in him the need to not let their history and the larger history of the Holocaust be forgotten. Michael contacted us back in the winter, last winter, to ask about arranging a survivor to speak for a group of his family. And we had further conversation with Michael, and we decided this was not something we should limit to just his family, and we made this a regular public program. And our Sunday with Survivor program was launched. So I'm grateful for his and his family's continued support, and I turn it over to Michael for the introduction to our program. Michael?
Awesome. Thank you, Thorin. And thank you to everyone at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center for helping to make this Sundays with Survivor series possible month after month. And thank you for all the work you do each and every day to educate young people about the histories of the Holocaust and its lessons. I also want to take a moment to thank everyone for being here during this live virtual event and for those who are viewing this as a recording. And a very special thank you to Rene Zuroff for sharing your testimony with us. Welcome to Sundays with Survivors. The power of the Sundays with Survivors program is that it gives survivors the opportunity to share their testimonies with people all over the world. And I am so grateful to be a part of this incredible endeavor. I usually start on a lighter note, but last month, 2 days after I participated in a Zoom discussion panel hosted by the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, which was about anti-Semitism on college campuses, a group of anti-Israel students Zoom bombed a mandatory class at my alma mater. Many of these students refer to themselves as proud anti-Zionists. These students made comments such as, the Holocaust has been used as a tool, and that anti-Semitism, as the fear that this could happen again, is being used preemptively to oppress and kill others. During the class, Jewish students expressed fear, discomfort, and concern for their safety and well-being. And ultimately, many left the class. And while at least one professor participated in the anti-Israel protests, the other professors stood by and remained silent. None of them thought to step in, mute mics, or remove offending students. And as of the date of this recording, the Silberman School of Social Work Administration has yet to put forth a statement condemning the anti-Semitic incident. As an author put it once, who's responsible? A person doesn't have to be anti-Semitic. They just have to remain passive and do nothing about the hatred around them. As we say, the Holocaust didn't start at Auschwitz. It started with words. In 1879, the word antisemitismus was coined by Wilhelm Marr at a time when it became outdated to hate the Jew because of our religion. The new term anti-Semitism sounded more scientific, and the hatred became more fashionable. Wilhelm Marr described himself as a proud anti-Semite, because although hating Jews because of our religion became distasteful, hating Jews because of our race, a vile and evil sort, became increasingly acceptable. And we all know how that turned out. Today, proud anti-Zionists hate the state of Israel, the Jew among the nations. It's become out of favor to refer to oneself as an anti-Semite, but to hate Jews because of our nation, a vile and evil sort, is becoming increasingly popular. What started as Judenhass morphed into anti-Semitism, and today has mutated into anti-Zionism. But hate is hate is hate is hate. After all, Jew hatred by any other name reeks just as sour. In the 1870s, the term anti-Semitism was coined. In the 1920s, the Nazi Party emerged. In the 1970s, anti-Zionism began to rear its ugly head. And today, the 2020s, anti-Zionism is the new trend. If you ever stop to ask yourself the question, what would I do if I were alive during the Holocaust? Your actions today are your answer. In just a few moments, you will bear witness to Renee's testimony. By bearing witness, you become a surrogate survivor. To bear witness and become a surrogate survivor are sacred acts. And with such a great honor comes great responsibility. This is just the beginning. To end anti-Semitism in its myriad forms, we must continue to take action tomorrow and the next day and the next and so on, so we can truly live the slogan, never again. As the grandchild of Holocaust survivors and the son of a Sabra, I am thankful for all of the survivors who share their testimonies, and to the organizations like the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center for making events like these possible. Again, thank you all for being here today and bearing witness to Renee's testimony. And if you would like to learn more about the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, either to donate, volunteer, visit the museum, or inquire about their education and community outreach programs, please visit their website at hmtcli.org. And with all of that, I pass the virtual stage back to Thorin. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks very much. And I know that everybody who learns about the events at the Silberman School are in horror because of it. And we know that you're fighting against it and are hoping that the school will respond. So I want to move on to Renee's testimony. As Michael said, the act of listening to testimony is an important and privileged one. And we, as he said, understand that by hearing from a witness, we too become witnesses, and we become entrusted with remembering the Holocaust. It's often painful for survivors to share their testimony, and it can also be difficult for the audience to hear that testimony. And so I would just ask that during this presentation, you're gentle with yourself and with other participants and our speaker. Renee is going to share her testimony for anywhere from about 50 minutes to an hour, and then we'll take some questions. So if you do have questions, please feel free to type them in using the Q&A function of Zoom. Oh, maybe that's not an option. Okay, maybe in the chat portion of Zoom. Or we can also, we'll open it up and people can say their questions out loud as well. But first, we want to get to Renee's testimony. So with that, I'm grateful, Renee, for you being willing to be here with us and share your testimony. And I pass the virtual stage over to you and give you the camera.
I guess I can start now.
Yes.
Hello, I am Rene Zuroff. My maiden name is Tabak, T-A-B-A-K, and I'm a child survivor. I was around 3 years old when it all began. I was born in Buchach, Poland, which is probably now the Ukraine. And I lived in Skala, not far from Buchach, also the current Ukraine. In 1939, the Russians invaded our town, and my father was on a list of capitalist, anti-humanity type of people because he was a successful businessman. And he was slated to be shipped off to the Gulag in Siberia. When he found out that he was on that list by the Russians, he escaped to my grandparents' town in Buchach, where nobody knew him. My mother was about to give birth to my sister at that point in our home. The Russians, the communists, they took away our home from us. We no longer had anything that belonged to us. And they told us to live in the maid's room, which we did. It was my mother and myself, and my sister was born at that point. We no longer had any possessions. We didn't own anything. And am I okay?
Yeah, I'm just gonna get it off your screen.
Okay. And, all right. And so we no longer had anything. And the Russian women who occupied our house wore my mother's dressing gowns to congratulate her on the birth of the baby. So this is how it started. We were able to get to my grandparents' hometown of Buchach, where my father was currently living. At that point, we no longer owned anything, we had nothing. Everything was taken away from us. My father was an anti-communist person because of what had happened, and he couldn't wait for the Germans to come in. Well, it didn't take that long till the Germans came into Buchach and occupied Buchach. Things became much, much worse. The Germans immediately set up different edicts. The edicts were the young men and all the business owners and intellectuals should meet in the town park the next morning for a meeting. My grandfather, who's a very wise man, told his family, don't you dare go. And they didn't. And in no time at all, we heard boop, 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 the shooting, all of them were executed. So the leaders of the town were gone. That was the beginning of it. In no time at all, the Jewish neighborhood was put into a ghetto, and with very, very little space. They would pack so many people into one apartment. Lice were everywhere. Typhus was prevalent. Everybody was sick. My entire family was sick. I was the only one who did not have typhus. God only knows how come, but I didn't have it. And things became worse and worse. There were so many restrictions in the Buchach ghetto, and we just felt we had to get out. So my father got us out, and we ended up being in the Kolomea ghetto. We thought that would be a better place. We had a little space for ourselves, and my parents were able to get working papers to go and work for Polish families. My father was a handyman, and my mother was a cleaning lady. They never did that before, but anyway, they were very lucky to get out. So they'd go for the day, and they'd come back in the evening. What I noticed in the ghetto, I saw such horrible sights. First of all, we hardly had any food. If people would peel potatoes, other people would run for the peels and try to eat them. We had very, very little. But what we did see, we saw people dying all the time. And Jewish people looked like corpses. They would wheel the dead people to their burial places. All that I saw as a young child. But on the other hand, teachers and other cultured people decided to set up schools for the children, so they should be continuing some kind of education. They taught them songs, etc. So this is what we saw in the ghetto, but we knew in no time at all the ghetto would be cleared. They would clear the ghetto, and the residents of the ghetto would be shipped off to Auschwitz and other concentration camps. So my father knew he had to get us out of that ghetto, because otherwise we would not be alive for a long time anymore. So somehow he was able to smuggle us out of the ghetto. You have to know that my father was a real leader. He was a fabulous person and fearless. So if not for my father, I would not be alive today. Anyway, he got us out of the ghetto. So where to go? We went into hiding places. We went back to the town. We knew Christian people, possibly they may take pity on us and hide us out. We hid in attics by removing a tile from an attic. That's how skinny we became. We were able to get into the attic. There were always dogs barking at us and trying to eat us. The Germans were all over the place. It was just a very, very scary type of situation. even today, when I see black boots and black leather coats, I really get very, very upset because it reminds me of the Gestapo. Anyway, so I told you about the ghetto and getting out of the ghetto. Now we were on our own, so we didn't know where to go. They were hunting Jews all the time. Jewish engineers made up wonderful hiding places that no one would know. There were secret passages, etc. While we were in the ghetto, this was before the ghetto, I'm trying to get it all in place, they would call these aktia, that's called action, to go hunt for Jews. So ever so often, the Germans decided to clear out the Jewish population in the towns and call it an aktia. Righteous Christians would be telling their Jewish friends when such an aktia would occur, and we could go into hiding. So at one point, there was an aktia, but we found out too late. So 4 of us would try to cross the street to run to the hiding place that we knew about. The Nazis, the Gestapo caught us, all 4 of us, and they said, "Halt, Jude, stop, Jew," and with their dogs and everything else. I was so little, I just ran. I wasn't afraid. And I went across the street and I ran all the way to the hiding place, the bunker, which I knew about. And I knocked on the door and gave the code, and they let me in. And then my grandparents and the relatives, they were all in the bunker. They started saying Kaddish for my family because they thought that we would have been killed at this point. But a short time later, my father, mother, and little baby sister, they arrived, they gave the code, and they miraculously escaped their fate. So such things did occur, and miracles did occur. Anyway, the hiding places. They were clearing out all the ghettos, every place, and they were clearing out the cities, and they kept on hunting for the Jews. One type of hiding place that I remember clearly was in the fields, tobacco fields. We had no place else to go. It was a very hot summer. I think it was in August. And we were hiding under these huge tobacco leaves. And it was nighttime. All we could see is the stars. And that's the only light we had. And all of a sudden we heard horrible screams. And we realized it was the Ukrainian partisans who came looking for Jews. And they knew about this particular hiding place. So we ran for our lives. My father and I ran, and my mother and sister, and we just were able to get away from them. As we crossed the path, we saw many dismembered people. What a sight for a child. They were lying there. I hate to say this, but they were headless, armless, whatever. They just totally butchered them on the way, and that was my initiation. And other such things did occur, and the hiding became much, much worse. Okay, let me see what I have. Okay. Finally, we were hiding in all possible places just to survive another day. Finally, my father was able to communicate with a former worker of his, a very nice older woman with her daughter. They lived in a hut. They lived in a hut in the woods. They were poor, and they were willing to give us a hiding place. The hiding place was actually outside their barn. They had a potato hole, which they saved the potatoes in the winter so they'd have some food. They kept the potatoes in that hole, and it was right outside their barn. This woman was willing to put the potatoes in different places, and that was our hiding place. In order to get to it, we had to walk through the barn and into the hiding place, which was below the barn. There were cows, and she had a cow and a horse and a pig and whatever. Whenever the animals urinated, the urine got into our hole. And that's how we survived for about 1.5 years. She was an amazing woman because she really rescued us. And And she risked her life and her daughters by taking care and giving us a safe place. But in order to get some food, there was very little food. She hardly had any. She would give us food on Sunday, 7 pierogies per person. And that was to sustain us. Anyway, my father would walk out in the middle of the night, many nights, and it was cold of winter. The snows are very high in eastern Poland, close to Russia. And he didn't have any shoes. He had sacks on his feet. That's how he walked. He walked to more generous and trustworthy Christians whom he knew, and they made a deal. They would barter. We had some jewelry. He would give a ring for a loaf of bread, a watch for some more, etc. And this is how we were able to survive. We hardly had food. It had to last a long time. So that was our experience in the potato hole. My mother never left it because it was too dangerous, and we didn't go out either. So everything, any situation that we had to be completed in that potato hole. There were rats and mice and all kinds of animals would come in. And when I think about it today, I even hate to talk about it, I shudder. If I see a mouse on TV, only on TV, I get hysterical. I just cannot take any creatures. And that was our survival, means of survival. Just see what I said. Okay, my mother and the children would stay in that potato hole, and the ground, we would sleep on the ground. My mother took a stick and taught us the ABCs. She would read us fairy tales, whatever she could get. And this is how we learned to read a bit and also math. She taught us basic math. In the potato hole, on the ground with a stick, which is really amazing, but it kept us busy. That's what we did. Let's see. Okay, my entire family, I would say, all of them were murdered except for us. And I'm coming to sort of the end of it, the survival. We were able to survive the horrible experiences, and due to my father, who's really my hero, we're alive. I'm alive now. I'm the last of the family. Okay, now the Russians are the ones who came in and they actually rescued us. That was in 1944 when they came in and the Germans started running away and we were survivors. So we realized that things were changing because we heard a lot of commotion. We heard planes flying overhead. So we figured the Russians are there and we were so happy. The Russians no longer considered us capitalists. We're as poor as church mice and we had nothing. So they really left us alone. And since my father had been in the wheat business before the Russians came in, and so they gave him a job as a manager of the wheat coming in. In other words, all the farmers had to give the state most of their wheat. My father had to supervise that and make sure that they didn't cheat. Well, you know, they weren't really the best people. These were the people who really took advantage of us and slaughtered us. And they were afraid of my father. And he checked to see if they had enough wheat in the sacks. If they cheated a bit, you know, he was a kind man. He didn't tell them. And they really would actually kiss his feet. They'd give us chickens and eggs as a bonus for that. So that was our stay after the Holocaust in Poland. And under Russian occupation, it was the Iron Curtain. Russia occupied most of those countries to the east, and Poland was one of them, which is now the Ukraine, that part. My father knew that we couldn't stay there because we'll be enslaved by the Russians once again, and we had to get out to the free lands. So with a lot of bribery and getting passports, and God only knows what he did. He was able to get us out. We were able to be smuggled out at night. We had to cross the Carpathian Mountains to keep walking. Sometimes we had no transportation and we had to walk on foot. Anyway, I didn't tell you a very important part of it. Let me go back a bit. I'm sorry. Okay. We were getting liberated by the Russians, and we were liberated by them. So we came back to our home in Skala, where we had our house. And the Poles who had occupied that house took off. And so we had the house to ourselves. While we were being in hiding, my mother tried to give us courage by telling us, someday soon, children, you'll be free again. You'll sleep in a bed and not on the ground floor. You'll have a warm house. You'll have food to eat. You'll eat at the table. And it was just our hope to survive. Anyway, so as I told you, we survived. We were able to go to our house. And the whole glory lasted about 10 days. When the Germans and the Russians started fighting each other at the front, and the Germans beat back the Russians. Now, we had to get out because the Germans were going to kill us. So we got out from Skala on the last Russian truck in order to avoid being captured by the Germans. As they started shooting at the front, the Germans and the Russians, we sat on the truck. I sat next to my mother. My father sat away from us, and my sister sat on my mother's lap. At that point, I was probably 6 and she was 3. They were shooting back and forth, and a horrible thing happened. A splinter of a hand grenade went through my mother's hair and into my sister's heart. That is a major part of the story. And my sister died immediately. We didn't even know that she had died. My mother took a look at her and started talking to her. And in Polish, her name was Buzia, Buzia, Buzia. And the child did not answer, and she was all yellow. And we took a look, there was blood dripping from near her heart. And that was the end of my sister. So you can imagine what happened. My mother became almost frozen. My father had to bury my sister. It was March 1944. He had to bury my sister in the frozen ground and say Kaddish over her, and that's how, and that was the end of that. And at that point, we went back with the Russians who were free to go back to the story where he was in charge of the wheat production and retaining the wheat for the Russians, etc. So getting back to the story. We knew that we had to get away from the Russians. We just could not be under the Iron Curtain with no freedom at all. We knew it would be just a nightmare all over again. So that's when I started telling you that he tried to get any kind of papers possible, any IDs, whatever, to get out from under the Russians. And that's when we were able to get out. First, it was like a horse and buggy who took us. And after that, we had to cross the mountains. And we finally got to Austria, to Vienna, which was divided into 4 sections. It was divided into the French, the British, the Russian, and the American. All 3 sections were fine to go to and stay there, but not the Russian section. That would have been enslavement all along. So we ended up living in the French section, and life started all over again. My father was able to get into all kinds of businesses, and there was money to be had, there was food to be had. We had a lovely apartment, we lived really well, but they wanted to educate me. I was the only child at that point. So in Austria, the language is German. I didn't know any German. I knew other languages, but not German. So they hired tutors for me, and I was studying very hard. They only wanted me to go to gymnasium, which is a classical school. You can only get in by examination. I really didn't know very much, but the tutor would come every day, the whole day. I would be tutored in every subject, and I was able to pass the exam to get into gymnasium. I think the principal was very kind, and they knew what we had gone through, so that's why I was accepted. Anyway, I was the only Jewish child in the entire school, and my parents told the principal, nobody's to know that I was Jewish. They didn't want anybody to bully me or to discriminate against me. So that's another story. I wasn't supposed to tell I was Jewish. So now the priest would come in once a week to teach the children religion. It was a private school. I was told by my parents to take my books and go to the library, and I did. My friends would ask me, what is your religion? I was told to tell my friends that I was an atheist. Everything was better than being a Jew. And that's how my life was. In the afternoon, my parents sent me to Hebrew school. So I had a dual existence, and I couldn't really tell about a lot of things that bothered me. Okay, the good things happened. My life actually became normal, and it's amazing how you can get it adjusted. And I was doing okay in school. I had many friends, and we'd go on skiing trips to the Alps, and I had lessons, piano lessons, all kinds of things. My parents, they tried to make up my childhood to me because I had lost my childhood. And so it went. But the great thing that happened in Vienna, my mother gave birth to my brother, Max. Max came back. And that was the biggest joy for us. It was like life was given back to us. So then we had my brother and me, but my father, even though things were very good for us in Vienna, it was after the Holocaust, my father just wanted us to be in a free land where we could live as Jews, where the children could have Jewish friends. They don't have to be ashamed of their identity or afraid for themselves. And this is what we did. So we arrived in America, in New York, in 1950. Now, I didn't know English, even though at the gymnasium I did study English as a foreign language. And I also studied Latin and French. They give you some education, it's unbelievable. So I knew some English, however, with a British accent, and I didn't feel very comfortable. Anyway, I entered high school in Brooklyn. Very different than a private girls' school, totally different. And they kept on giving me tests in the school to see where to place me. Make a long story short, I did high school in 2 years. I kept getting skipped because I had this previous education. But I worked on my English. I did not want to have an accent. Every time I would speak in class, the students would look back and there weren't that many immigrants then in this country, and I was an oddity. So, I see there was a question. I remember.
Don't worry about it.
Can I tell them later? Okay. All right, let me just finish my story and I'll answer all the questions. Anyway, I made it my business to really learn English very well and proficiently. And when my parents would speak to me in another language, I would not answer. I'd only answer if they spoke in English. So they were forced to learn English quite well. And that was okay. That was fine. I was happy. I finished high school, but I was 16 and socially immature. I was very sheltered. So I wasn't ready to go to college, nor did we have so much money for me to go. My parents moved to New Jersey, by the way. So I decided to get a job after high school in a bank, some kind of an assistant. I was a kid, but anyway, they took me and I was able to work there and save my money. And on my own, I signed up for NYU because I only wanted to go back to New York and go to NYU. My parents really were not very sophisticated about those things, so I had to do everything by myself. And I remember how I went to NYU. I took 2 suitcases on the bus, and that's how I got to NYU. And I loved it, and it was great. And I was at NYU for 2 years. And then I switched to Temple University in Philadelphia, and I graduated there. I went on for master's degrees, and I ended up loving my profession. I taught ESL in New York and Queens, and I became an ESL supervisor. And I totally related to those students. I loved them and they loved me because I've been in a similar situation. So I taught for 35 years, loved my career. That was the best career I could have thought of. And now I'm retired. I married a long time ago in 1962. I had a wonderful husband, wonderful person, but my husband passed away in 2006. And he had Parkinson's, so that was not easy, but the life that we had together was very good. I gave birth. I have, thank God, two wonderful children. My daughter, who's listening in right now, she lives in Westchester with 3 grandchildren whom I adore. And in fact, this coming Saturday, we're going to have our last bar mitzvah. I have 9 grandchildren, and the last bar mitzvah will be this Saturday of my sweet, precious grandson, Noah, who's named after my husband, Norman. So that's a joy. And my brother also did very well. We all did well, and that was partially because we wanted to make our parents proud of us. So my brother was some kind of a genius. He is a nuclear physicist at Livermore Lab in California. He had a full scholarship to go to MIT and to Harvard, full scholarship. And both colleges were competing for him. They came down to speak to my parents, but he chose MIT because he was interested in physics and they had a better physics department. Anyway, he has a doctorate in nuclear physics, and lately I haven't seen him because of the virus, but God willing, I should see him as soon as I can. My son lives in Israel, and because it's like giving back, because of his mother's suffering and what I went through, he had to give back to the Jewish people. So I've got a lovely family in Israel. I have 6 grandchildren in Israel and 4 great-grandchildren. And my son, his wife, and my 3rd grandson are coming for Noah's bar mitzvah. So you can imagine how happy I am. It'll be a wonderful reunion. And basically, I think I told you most everything. I was interviewed by Spielberg. There was a whole video, like a 3-hour video about my life. And that's my testimonial. But let's see. I told you about.
Renee,
Yes.
don't feel, I think people have some questions. Maybe we can move to the questions.
Would they like to ask questions now?
Yeah, it sounds like you've wrapped up
I just want to finish. Okay, I believe treat all people with dignity and pleasantness. Treat people according to their character, not according to who they are and what color and religion they are. And that's basically my motto in life. And I think I'm finished now, and you can be asking me questions.
Thank you so much, Renee.
Thank you.
I know a bunch of people have already sent in questions.
I can't hear you so well.
I know a bunch of people have turned in questions already. I'm going to pass it over to Michael. Michael's going to moderate some of those questions.
Okay, it's hard for me to hear you. I'm sorry. Okay.
So thank you so much for sharing this, and just knowing that your family is here today is so beautiful. This is how we started the Sundays with Survivors program, is to invite family here. So it's incredible to see your family as well. We had a question from Greta. I wanted to ask Greta if she would like to share her question first for you to answer. So Greta, I think you'll have to unmute yourself. Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Hi. Thank you for sharing all that you shared.
Speak a little louder, please.
Okay. Hi. Thank you for sharing all that you shared. It's definitely very inspirational to hear, your resiliency to it, but also, good to be aware of what you went through so we can try to prevent stuff from that happening. I think you said that you were around 3 years old when.
Could you speak a little louder? It's very hard for me to understand you. I'm sorry.
Okay. It's okay. I think you said you were around 3 when the event started happening with the Holocaust.
What is she asking?
Yes, yeah. Renee said she was around 3 years old at the time, correct?
Right.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering, like, you know how much you were aware of what was happening, like, to people who are Jewish, like, at that age?
Yes, I was quite aware. All children were being made aware. They knew to, when we were hiding, we kept our mouth shut, as they say, not a sound. If a child would start crying, the parents were forced to smother the child because there would be another 50 people in hiding, and they couldn't take a chance. So we were very, very aware. You matured very fast.
Michael, another
Yep.
question?
I'm sorry?
Is there another question?
Yeah, first of all, we have a lot of people saying thank you for
Okay, thank
sharing
you
your
for listening.
story.
Okay.
So I was going to ask you, because you mentioned coming to the United States, did your entire immediate family came with you to the United States? Is that correct, you said?
Yes, my parents, my brother, and I, we all came together.
And do we have, I'm sorry, we have one person who's with her hand raised. I don't know the name. Is it Art? Art, if you'd like to share, you just have to unmute yourself.
Yes, Arthur, he's a friend of mine.
Oh, wonderful. Sure, you'll just have to unmute.
Renee, you're an example of survival. Now, my question is, I know you were very young when you started at 3, but as you got older and you saw what was happening, did you ever despair? Did you ever give up hope? Did you have faith that you would be saved? Your father was a hero to you. By all means, he saved you. There was no question about it. He was well prepared. He was able to do what he had to get your family through. But how did you personally feel as you went under the German influence, the Russian influence, back to the Germans, back to the Russians? There was really no moment of security. How did you feel inside? Did you have a belief in a divine presence? What was your feeling?
My belief mainly was due to my parents. I believed in my parents. I felt that they would save me. They were always there to nurture us and to be with us forever. They were always there. Anytime I had any kind of problem, I could go to them. In fact, when I was married with my children, we would go to visit them in New Jersey. My mother and father stayed up with me till midnight, and we'd have our own conversations. My husband went to sleep, the kids went to sleep, but it was my mother and father and I, and we would tell about the stories and the remembrances and all of that. We were extremely close. And as long as I had them, I felt I had a rock. And then when they died, my rock was my husband. And then my husband died. And my rocks are my children. They're wonderful, they're great. But I felt really isolated and alone. That main rock was gone.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that question, Art, and thank you, Renee, for that thoughtful answer. Speaking of your children, I did want to, since we have Dawn on the call also, if you don't mind, I first wanted to ask her a question, what it's like to be on these calls or in the audience and hear your mother's testimony. And before you answer that, I just want to say if people want to put their questions or comments in the chat, I'll also still field that at the same time. But Dawn, yeah, if you'd like to share how that feels to be a part of it.
First, may I say something?
Sure.
Dawn is an outstanding young woman. She'll be very embarrassed by my saying that, but she's amazing. She's a full-time lawyer, raised 3 wonderful children, wonderful, is married to a very lovely young man who's a doctor. It's a Jewish mother's dream, you know. And I adore them. They're really my support system. They live in Westchester and they're just great. That's now, Dawn, you can speak.
I just want to say that was a beautiful Jewish mother introduction.
She's definitely a Jewish mother. So here, I've heard my mom's story in bits and pieces ever since I was maybe 6 years old. So I'm very familiar with it. It's very much a part of our lives. And it's when, you know, there's certain things that my mom has done throughout her life that I thought, you know, now I understand why. At the time, I didn't understand why she was doing it. Like, she would always go out the, going to the bank, she would drive through the exit rather than go in the entrance because she did not want to follow rules. And I thought that was so weird because you should go in the entrance, not the exit. But I think it's because she doesn't want to be controlled because of the Holocaust. And these little things like that, you know, it always goes back to her childhood and her, you know, she's fearless. She just does basically whatever she wants. She defies death. She had COVID and she survived, of course, because there was no other choice. And I expect her to just live until 120 because that's what she has to do. There's no other option. So it's just growing up with someone who could do anything and just, she, you know, she's just a superhuman. That's basically how I grew up. And my children are very close with her, and she's a big part of our lives.
Beautiful, thank you. And I'll say my father always adds to that, may you live to 120, but feel like 20. We also have someone, and I'll ask one more question, but there was a comment that someone said that, again, thank you so much for sharing. More people should listen to you and know your story and how fragile life is.
Can I say something?
Oh, I'm sure. That's my father.
Hi, Renee. It's so beautiful to listen to you. Thank you for everything. I just want to say, you know, my mother also was a survivor, and she was fearless also. She wasn't afraid of anything, you know. I'll just tell a fast story because we had a blackout in New York in 1970 something, and my mother just started driving, and she only knew how to get home one way with the Belt Parkway. I don't know if you know the Belt Parkway, but I took the tunnel was closed, so I said to her, take Flatbush Avenue. My mother draped with all her jewelry. She picked up people along Flatbush Avenue. I don't want to say what kind of people she picked it. And I said, Mom, you weren't afraid? She goes, I'm not afraid of anything. You know, she said, I seen it all. And, you know, that's what you remind me. You know, you brought the memories to me. And that's the way she felt. You know, once you've been through hell, nothing is like it. You know, and I listened to your daughter. My mother also, she basically, my father never spoke about it. He lost his whole family, but my mother force-fed me till I was like 10, 11 years old. Every day I would hear stories and stories and stories. And it was thank you for sharing with us your testimony. Thank you. God bless you and your family. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Dad. Just remember to mute. Yeah, perfect. And just one more, I'll ask one more question unless there's anyone else who wants to ask a question. Does Barbara have her hand raised? Barbara? Okay, Barbara, maybe if you want to go and then I'll ask one more question. Barbara, you'll just have to unmute it. Perfect.
It's a comment, actually. As a friend, you would never know that Renee had such an upsetting childhood. She's fun to be with, always smiling, and has such marvelous spirit. And it's amazing to hear. I have heard parts of this before, but you have to know that she has overcome so much of the sadness of her childhood, and to be with her is to have a happy, joyous time. So thank you, Renee.
Thank you, Barbara. Thanks so much. Good to see you.
Thank you, that was beautiful. And just want to remind everyone, just put yourselves on mute when you're finished, just in case. Thank you, Barbara, that was really a beautiful sentiment. It reminds me that, yeah, sometimes we don't realize what people have gone through. So it's so important also to hear these testimonies for that reason. We'll have, I guess we do still have time for a few more questions, so I guess I'll ask them. Someone asked, how do you maintain such a positive attitude, which I think is a perfect next question.
Okay. I never go back. I don't want to go back. I go forwards. I think that I've been very fortunate. Most of my life has been good. This was a terrible episode, but it made me strong. I'm a very strong person. And I thank God every day for the wonderful kids that I have, loving, wonderful children, bright, they're great. And grandchildren, I adore these people. I mean, that gives me my life. And nice friends. And even during the COVID, I went out with my friends. We even went to the movies, whatever was available, because I want to live life. I'm not going to be stuck in fear. I've had enough fear, and I will beat that.
Beautiful, thank you. We have two more questions. Two questions. One is, when did you start sharing your testimony, and how has that been throughout the years? So that's the first question.
Okay, is it your question?
I'm sorry?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, that's the question is,
Okay.
yeah. When did you start sharing your testimony, and what has it been like sharing it throughout the year?
Okay. First, it was very difficult to share, especially to share with people I know. That's my weirdness. I'd rather talk to strangers. And I also have been speaking in Irving Roth's Holocaust studies. I was part of his speaking bureau. And I spoke to children. I speak to different kids. It's very easy for me to relate to children. I happen to love children. They're not judgmental. They accept you. They're appreciative. Adults many times are judgmental. Or they'll interrupt you with their stories of the parents who came here because of the pogroms. It minimizes my stories. I don't want to talk to them. But I started being aware of the public events of the Holocaust. In 1990, there was a whole gathering of Holocaust survivors at the Marriott Hotel. In fact, my daughter came. She was a college student. She came with us. And it was very, very meaningful. And that's why I became aware of other survivors, and I got into groups.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think I've also heard that you speak to students as well. So I think that's a wonderful.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I love kids, I do.
And so that we'll wrap up with one final question, if that's okay. What advice would you give to the world? I think that's an excellent open-ended question.
To the world. Well, the world, they should stop hating us. Anti-Semitism really should be just removed from this world. The Jewish people have been suffering for many, many thousands of years. They've been victimized so many times. I don't see what terrible things they've done to the world. They've achieved so much with the medicine, with computers, with culture, with anything. And why do people really hate us? We're very strong people who can achieve for the world. And I just wish people would be educated. I'm glad we're doing this with the students. The kids are much more accepting. So maybe we'll erase anti-Semitism from this world. And to be Israel, had we had Israel during the Holocaust, 6 million would not have been killed. So to me, Israel is just the love of my life. And that's why my son lives there, because that's part of who we are.
Thank you so much, Renee. Thank you, everyone, for being on this call. Thank you so much to Renee for sharing your testimony. I also just want to give a shout out. My father is running or walking 2,021 miles this year and raising money for the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, so we can do more programs like this. He just hit 1,000 miles.
And I'm going to be 70 this week, so I'm no teenager.
Fabulous, yeah.
So a little extra.
And so again, I just want to thank you, Renee, for sharing your testimony, for everyone being here to bear witness. And again, if you want to find out how to either volunteer, donate, get involved with the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, you can find them at hmtcli.org. And I'm going to leave Thorin with the last remarks. But again, thank you everyone for being here.
Both of you, Renee, I'm very grateful for you sharing your testimony with us and being part of this. You're always such a generous. So effective and moderate. And your father for so thank you all for joining us this evening, and I look forward to seeing you at some of our other programs. And I wish you all a good night. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here.